Welcome back to lab. Last week we talked about the methods section, and this time we are going to talk about getting the info you need to be able to fill out that methods section when you're writing it. So first, as a review, quick quiz, what are the three parts of the methods section that you need for your final paper? Give me a second. If you said that there was a participants section, a measures section, and a procedures section, then you were correct. So we're going to be talking about each of those three parts and what data you need to be putting in those participants, measures, and procedures sections. For your participants section, you're going to need to cover three different things. The first is your demographics, and you're going to use SPSS for these analyses. You always need to have the number of participants from the data set. You need to have the average age as well as the range, what is the youngest and oldest person in your population. You need to have a breakdown of the race ethnicity, which is provided in the race variable in your SPSS file, and then the gender breakdown, percentage of male, percentage of female, etc. And again, that is presented in your SPSS file as the gender variable. You're also going to want to include in your participant section information about the recruitment. How did the participants come to your study? And for us, that's just students enrolled in Psych 317, and we used a convenience sampling, which was talked about in this week's lecture, where it's just whoever's coming to us for our research, whoever's available and is willing to do the study. So you can call it a convenience sample. You could also describe your own kind of experiences being recruited. Don't spend a lot of time on this. It just has to be enough information for us to understand the kind of participants who are coming. We also need to establish whether there was any kind of compensation. This can be in your participant section or it can be in your procedure section. It's really kind of up to you, but just decide where you're going to put it and make sure it's there. It only needs to be mentioned once, not in both sections. And for us, students were not compensated for participation. You know that you were not compensated. You were just asked nicely and with the understanding that if you filled out the data, it would help you and your peers to have data to analyze. After your participants section, you're then going to go to the subsection of measures. And for this, you need to include all of the information about your continuous measures, otherwise known as your scales. Now, I already said in last video that you don't need to have information about all of the different measures that were in the survey, just the ones that you are using in your study. So if you're doing a correlational study and you have two continuous measures, then you need to have two paragraphs, one paragraph for each of those measures telling us what it is. If you're doing the t-test though, then you have one continuous and one categorical, so you only need the one paragraph describing the continuous measure. Now your categorical variable probably should have already been mentioned in your participants section, so make sure that it is there somewhere, either in your participants section or in your measures section. When describing a scale measure, you need to include the name of the measure, what type it is. For us, we're going to be using all Likert type scales, no open-ended or anything like that, but this is where you would describe that. You should also have a citation for who created the scale, and then make sure you have that reference on your reference page. You can find the reference information in the document on Canvas that describes each of the scales. You're also going to want the scale anchors, a sample item, and the Cronbach's alpha. So you can get all of those, again, from the documents that are available on Canvas. As a reminder, here again are the variables that you had available for you to choose. Now you could decide to keep the ones that you've done before, or if you want to be wild and change up your study because something else is interesting to you, you can always do that, but these are still the variables available. You'll see the list of continuous variables, and most of those are going to be the scale variables that you would describe in your measures. The only one that's not is the age variable. You don't have to describe that one. You're going to include in your participants section anyway. Then for the categorical variables, if you were using one of those in the t-test, again, you should include it in your participants section, or if you feel like it's necessary, you can include it in your measures section. But it doesn't have quite the same, you don't have to have anchors, you don't have to have the item example. You can be a little bit less details are required for these categorical variables. As a reminder, in your methods section, when you're describing your scales, you need to include that Cronbach's alpha. A Cronbach's alpha is the measure of internal consistency. It's the inter-item correlation in a way, and this is how well those items on the scale hang together. How much scoring high on one is systematically related to how you score on another one of the items. And this information, I'm not making you calculate it yourself. Just be too much to go over. Maybe you remember how to do it from your stats, but I've already gone ahead and recorded that Cronbach's alpha, and it's in the document on Canvas that describes each of the measures. This same document also has these scale anchors, which is again, like, what is your scale from 1 to 10, 1 to 5, 1 to 7? What does that 1 mean? Is that strongly disagree? Is it strongly agree? Is it never? Is it all the time? You need to let us know, you need to let the reader know what those scale anchors mean. This document also has sample questions, and you can find the PDF of each of the scales on Canvas. There's a whole file folder dedicated to each of the scales, so you can go and find that information. Make sure you put at least one sample item in quotes in your method section. And this is, I know I've said don't use quotes. This is the one time where you do use quotes. So make sure to look over that example method section on Canvas, and you can see kind of how it's done. An example that we looked at last week was this body shape questionnaire description. So here we have the body image dissatisfaction was assessed using the BSQ, again, that body shape questionnaire, which has the citation there, and it kind of describes what it's for. And make sure to include how many points on the scale there are, as well as what they indicate from never to always, and how it was scored. This talks briefly about the test-retest reliability, discriminant validity, etc., and make sure all the way at the end to include that Cronbach's alpha of 0.97. So this is a great example. It is missing a few things that we do want from you guys. So it hasn't described that it's a self-report scale. It also doesn't include any sample items from the scale, such as I feel poorly about my body. So that's ways that this could be an even better example by having those pieces. I also want to make a note about some of the changes to the categorical variables, specifically converting them into dichotomous measures. So I mentioned in one of the labs when you're running a t-test that a t-test only works when you have one continuous variable and you have one categorical variable with 2 levels. So you're comparing 2 groups. Your independent variable is that categorical measure, and you have group A, group B, and you're seeing how they systematically differ on your continuous dependent variable. If you have more than 2 variables, you need to run a different kind of analysis called an ANOVA, which you can do, but for the scope of this project, I'm only requiring at least doing either a correlation or a t-test. So if you're going to do a t-test, if you chose a categorical variable, then it needs to be 2 levels. In other words, a dichotomous measure. Introduced that terminology recently. This is one you should know. Dichotomous means 2 levels only. So what I've gone ahead and done is convert some of the non-dichotomous variables into dichotomous. For example, we might have gender, which has multiple levels. There's the cisgender male, cisgender female, trans female. There's an other. There are lots of different ways that somebody could identify their gender. But if we are going to do a t-test, we need to distinguish them in 2 groups. So I've converted that variable into a male-female, where 1 level is male, 1 level is female. So you need to describe that process. The same has been done for sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, relationship status, and religion. And in the document on Canvas, that information about how these have been categorized, how they've been dichotomized, is available. You can also see in the SPSS document, there is still the non-dichotomous variable, like gender and sexual orient and race. And then there's next to it the dichotomous variable, so female, male, heterosexual _ LGBTQ, and then white, non-white. So you can see kind of how the scores match up, so you can confirm if they answered a certain way in the non-dichotomous, how was it converted in the dichotomous? So you use a little bit of your own logic there. So if you have any questions about that, make sure to ask them as soon as possible. Ask your TAs, they understand how it was done. And make sure you're clear if you were using a dichotomous categorical variable, how it was created. Again, all this information is on Canvas, but if you have any questions, let us know. Finally, you have your procedures section. Here is where you say how the participants participated, what did they actually do. So for us, that means they did a computer-based survey and they completed the scales and answered the questions. Pretty simple. As I've said before, the procedures section for a survey is usually pretty simple, maybe just a paragraph or 2, whereas if you're doing some experimental study, it can be a lot longer. So for us, pretty simple. I also this week talked about the concepts of an informed consent and a debriefing, which are particularly important when you are doing any kind of human subjects research, especially where you have some kind of manipulation or you are doing some deception in your study. For the purposes of ours, because it's just a small class study, there wasn't really a lot of things you need to know going into it or coming out of it. We did not, in fact, have an informed consent or a debriefing, which you can say in your procedure section. So all of these details need to be described and thinking about so that anybody who's reading your paper knows exactly what the participant experienced. So here's an example of a procedure section. Again, here it's talking about the undergraduate participant pool and from a large public university. There's information about gender role beliefs and self-perceptions. They clicked on a survey link, and it goes all the way through all the details. But there's still a couple things that might be missing here. It's pretty good, but it doesn't talk about the fact that there's no debriefing and no informed consent, which you could include there. So this is a pretty good model. You can kind of take this, put it in your own words, of course. Do not plagiarize this kind of thing, but this is the same kind of level of depth you are looking for. Now that you know what's needed in your methods section, we're going to talk about how to get there. As a reminder, for all of this, you need to have descriptive statistics. These are the statistics that describe, they're descriptive, or explain the spread of our data. And we need these in both our methods and our results section. Again, you want to describe your participants, you want to describe your scales, you want to describe the average scores within the groups if you're doing a t-test. There's lots of different instances where we need to give the information about our variables to the reader. Now in our methods section, specifically in the participants section, we definitely need to report the descriptives for the age, gender, race, ethnicity, and I'm also going to include year in school there. Let's throw that one in as well. It's not as common. Most articles you read will just have those first three, but it's worth it for us to have. You're also going to need access to your survey data, which you can get on Canvas with the file survey data s25_clean. This is one that I have already cleaned up for you, so it has all of the non-dichotomous, dichotomous variables. It's also aggregated all of the variables, all of the scale variables already for you, so you just have the scores already. You don't have to do any recoding, no kind of transformations, anything like that. It's ready to go for you. So go ahead and when you're ready, open up SPSS, find the file that you have saved and open it. Again, you can go through Apps to Go or any of the other processes. By now, you should know how to get into this because we've had a few weeks of practice. And then you want to run your descriptive statistics. If you're doing a categorical variable, you need to go into the Analyze Descriptive Statistics Frequencies, because this is a frequency analysis there. You're trying to figure out the breakdown, how often somebody reported a certain value on that variable. You put the variables into the variable box and you hit OK, and that's how you get the frequencies. If you're doing a continuous variable, such as any of your scales, or you're trying to find out information about age or sleep quality, then you need to do a descriptive analysis where you're looking for the means and the standard deviations. Here you go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and then Descriptives. And then again, put the variables into the box, but make sure that you click the Options button and ensure that mean, standard deviation, and then min and max if you're doing age are also selected. Then you can click OK. I always suggest that you save your output as you go. You do not want to have to remember how to run these analyses and repeat them and do them over again. Just save it or take screenshots of it, whatever works for you so that you would do it once and you have it. You also, if you have any questions, go ahead and review Lab 2, where I show how to do the frequency analysis and the descriptive analysis using SPSS. Basically this slide, but a little bit more visuals, step-by-step process using one of our older data sets. So now that you're in the data, the process to help you know what you're trying to find, which descriptives you need, there is the Descriptives in SPSS worksheet that's available on Canvas. Again, use SPSS to answer all these questions. Don't go through and try and count the data yourself. You can refer to Lab 2 for the step-by-step instructions. I just said, but it always helps to say things twice. The measures subsection will also need some descriptive statistics about your variables, and you can see the demographics and scale information document that's on Canvas, which will give a bit more details about each of your scales. You can also find all the PDFs, but all of the information is there. We also have a methods section worksheet on Canvas, which describes the necessary elements that are needed in those three subsections: the participants, the measures, and the procedures section. This is a great tool for you to use while you are writing your methods section, which you will have to do. In this course, there is no methods section that is due at a certain time. It is just going to be part of your final paper. We will have an assignment later on where you have to show that you understand your analyses, but the methods section itself will just kind of go into your paper. If you have any questions about your methods and want to make sure you're writing it well, you can always reach out to your TAs and they are certain to help you. All right, that's it. Please let us know if you have any questions, and we'll see you next week.